Hello everyone, my name is Tobias Greitemeyer. I'm from the University of Innsbruck in Austria. I would like to present my work on the predictors of blatant dehumanization toward refugees, and I would like to focus on the dark personalities and human values and to what extent human values account for the relationship between dark personalities and human dehumanization. So dehumanization, as you may know, occurs along a spectrum from relatively mild forms to relatively severe forms. And in 2015, now Kateli and others said the blatant dehumanization could be measured by asking participants of their willingness to overly describe other people as less evolved than their own group members. And in the present research, I would like to present you some data on what subclinical malicious personality dimensions predict blatant dehumanization. In terms of malicious personality dimensions, one could refer to David Paulus and colleagues, and they said there are four dimensions of dark personalities. First, it's narcissism. The second one is machiavellism. The third one is psychopathy, and the fourth one is everyday sadism. Narcissists, they seek admiration and attention, and they have the feeling that they are better than other people. Machiavellism, these are people who would like to manipulate and exploit other people. Psychopathy, these are people with a strong tendency of thrill-seeking and unemotionality. And fourth, everyday sadists, and these are people who find pleasure in causing harm to other people. And yeah, in the present two studies, I examined the relationship between blatant dehumanization and the four dark tetra traits. So the first question was whether the dark tetra traits are related to the measure of blatant dehumanization toward refugees. And the second question was if there are relationships between the dark tetrad and dehumanization, what accounts for this relationship, and this will be examined in the second study. So in the first study, we had 170 participants. We had a measure of the four dark tetrad traits and a measure of blatant dehumanization toward refugees. So participants were asked how evolved is an average group member. I'll show you the exact groups in a minute. And then we could calculate the difference between the in-group and the out-group. We had three different in-groups and we had the out-group, which were the refugees. We used the measure of now Kateli and others. So here's the measure how they said one could measure blatant dehumanization. So we had three in-groups. We had Germans, we had Austrians and Europeans, and the third one, these were the refugees. So we calculated the difference between the three in-groups from the out-group measure. And here are the results of the correlation coefficients between the four dark tetrad measures and our measure of dehumanization. And as you can see, there was only one significant correlation, and that was the one for machiavellism. For the other three, unexpectedly, at least to me, there were no relationships between narcissism, psychopathy, and everyday sadism to blatant dehumanization, but a relatively strong one for machiavellism. So in the second study, we aim to replicate our pattern of findings, and we also were interested in what accounts for the relationship between the dark tetrad and the blatant measure of dehumanization, especially machiavellism. So in study 2, we had 284 participants, and we referred to the basic human values account by Schwartz and colleagues, and we were interested in whether the basic human values would account for the relationship between the dark tetrad and dehumanization. So the 10 basic human values you can see then below, and the 10 human values can be can be summarized to four second factors, and these were self-enhancement, self-transcending, openness to change, and conservation values. And previous research has shown that the dark personality traits are positively related to the endorsement of self-enhancement values, which are achievement and power, and negatively related to the endorsement of self-transcendent values, and these are measures of universalism and benevolence. So the question was whether people with relatively high scores on the dark personality traits, and especially Machiavellism, demonize refugees because they prefer to pursue their own interests, and that would be achievement and power, and or because they care little about the well-being of others, and that would be benevolence and universalism. Here first the correlation coefficient, and once again only Machiavellism was significantly correlated with the blatant dehumanization measure. Narcissism, psychopathy, and everyday sadism, the relationships were non-significant and close to zero. So the study 2 first of all replicates the main finding from study 1, that Machiavellism was the strongest predictor of our blatant dehumanization measure. In terms of human values, we indeed found that self-enhancement values mediated the relationship between Machiavellism and dehumanization. We also found a negative relationship between Machiavellism and self-transcendence values, as in previous research, but self-transcendent values were not related to the measure of blatant dehumanization, and because of that, they couldn't mediate the relationship between Machiavellism and dehumanization. So overall of the dark tetrad, only Machiavellism is reliably related to the overt belief that refugees are less human than other groups. And this finding aligns well with previous research showing that Machiavellism, but not narcissism or psychopathy, is related to classic attitudes toward asylum seekers. So it seems that especially Machiavellism is related to intergroup hostility. In terms of the mediating mechanism, those high on Machiavellism blatantly dehumanize refugees because of a pursuit of their own interests. So they are interested in achievement and power, and they are not so interested it's not because of their low concern for the well-being of others. Importantly, the other dark tetrad facets, they also correlated positively with self-enhancement values. So future research would be interesting to examine why exactly Machiavellism, and more than the other dark tetrad facets, is predictive of blatant dehumanization, because to be honest, I would have expected that all four dark tetrad facets would be predictive of blatant dehumanization, but it seems it's only Machiavellism. So that would be really interesting for future research, and maybe you have some thoughts about it. Thank you very much.
Hello everybody, I am Francesca Prati from the University of Bologna, and I'm happy to present the preliminary data of a research project I'm working with Nadira Faber and Tanya Tarzeva, where we investigated how helping behavior does not always promote the helper reputation, why it is the case, and its related consequences. In this project, we were inspired by multiple recent events that occur in different contexts, but have in common helping behaviors toward people in need that involve potential costly implication for other people, leading these people to openly condemn the helpers. We wanted to test the factors that can explain these reactions. Research has mainly focused on the helper perspective, showing that helping behavior always involves a cost for the helper, but people decide to perform prosocial behaviors because these also involve a benefit for them by promoting their good reputation within their community with all the positive consequences related to it. But what happens when the helping behavior comes with a potential cost for the other people of the community, for example, that are not the receiver of the helping behavior, but only the perceiver of it and see its potential cost or risk for them that this helping behavior involves? Does this challenge their evaluation and behaviors toward the helper, and how this works? We conducted a set of studies to answer these questions, where we manipulated the potential cost that the participant would face in relation to another person helping behavior, in order to investigate the effect of this potential cost on the attribution of uniquely human traits and prosocial behavior toward the helper. The survey includes also other measures, but I will focus on this one today, and specifically for humanization, we employed the attribution of uniquely human traits and the attribution of experience and agency toward the helper. And for prosocial behavior, we employed the dictator game, where we tested the amount of money that participant wanted to share with the helper, and the collaboration choice, where participants had to decide to what extent they wanted to collaborate and support the helper in a further task. Moreover, we examined potential moderators of the participant potential cost on the humanization of the helper by manipulating in study 2 the helper affiliation, hypothesizing that outgroup affiliation would further decrease the humanness of the helper when this comes with a cost for participants. And in study 3, we manipulated the helping decision to assess whether non-helping decision would decrease the humanization of the helper, especially when this comes with no cost for the participants. Across the 3 studies, we employed a cover story unrelated to a specific actual event, where participants were told they were paired with 2 other people on Prolific, and each of them was assigned to specific roles involving some decision they have to make that influence the final amount of money they actually receive at the end of the survey. These roles were the decider, the receiver, the observer, but all participants were assigned to the observer role that has to make no choice. Instead, they were told that the decider player has to make a series of choices between sharing some money with the receiver or not. The helping option, to share money with the receiver, leads not only the decider to lose part of their money, but also the observers, so the participant could lose some of their money in the participant cost condition, as reported in the slides. Or they could keep the same amount of money independently of the decider choice, and this was the no-cost condition. In study 1 and 2, the decider always opted for the helping behavior that involved a potential cost for the participant or not, whereas in the study 3, the decider in some condition opted for the non-helping behavior. As you see in the slides, it was clear to the participant that, given the different amount of money that the experimenter attributed to each player at the beginning of the task, the helping decision lead to a redistribution of resources in the direction of equal amount of money across all players. Instead, the choice of non-helping the receiver lead to a final unequal distribution of money across players. There were 3 different rounds where the decider have to make their choices, where we varied the amount of money but keep constant the differences of money across players that I just explained. In study 1, we found the same pattern of results across measures, showing that participants were less likely to perceive the decider helping behavior as the right decision, to dehumanize the decider to a higher extent, and to be less willing to perform a prosocial behavior toward the decider when their helping choice did involve a potential cost for them compared to when it did not. In study 2, we replicate our findings by using different measures. As results show that participants attributed uniquely human traits to a lower extent to the decider and were less willing to perform prosocial behavior toward the decider when his or her helping behavior involved a cost for them compared to when it did not. Instead, we did not find an effect or interaction of the decider affiliation. In study 3, we consistently found the same pattern of results across our measures, showing that, independently of whether the decider choices came with a cost or not for the participants, they were more willing to attribute experience, agency, and perform prosocial behavior toward the decider when this made helping compared to non-helping choices in favor of the receiver. Moreover, the decider helping choices led participants to attribute the decider more experience, agency, and perform prosocial behavior when this choice came with no cost for them as compared to when it came with a cost. Whereas the decider non-helping choices showed no difference in the attribution of experience and agency between cost and non-cost conditions, and participants were more willing to perform prosocial behavior toward the decider when the non-helping choices were related to a cost compared to a no-cost condition for the participants. We also tested and found a partial mediation of experience but not agency on the effect of helping decision of the decider on prosocial behavior of the participants toward the decider. On the basis of this set of studies, we can conclude by saying that helping leads to a reduction of the humanization of the helper, not just in terms of judgment, but also behavior, when this action involves a potential cost for the perceivers. However, the corresponding non-helping behavior choice increases the dehumanization of the helper when it does not involve a potential cost for the perceivers. And among the uniquely human traits that we measure, the attribution of those related to experience but not agency partially explain this effect of helping behavior on eliciting prosocial behaviors toward the helper. Thank you very much for your attention, and I also want to thank Nadia Faber and Tanya Tardeva that work with me on this project.
Hello everybody, my name is Chiara Pecini and I'm a third-year PhD student at the University of Genoa in Italy. In this talk I'm going to present you a research conducted with Eleonora Crapolicchio, Gian Antonio Di Bernardo and Loris Vezzali. The project I'm going to talk about investigated the link between sexting, moral disengagement strategies and non-consensual dissemination of sexual materials. When we talk about non-consensual dissemination of sexual materials, we refer to the diffusion of private sexual materials such as videos or photos without the consent of the subject. As in other gendered practices, NDSM mainly affect women and represents a form of sexual and power abuse. One related variable of NDSM is sexting, which represents the act of sending or receiving explicit sexual materials. On one side, sexting is not a negative practice per se, but on the other side, it can become dangerous, especially when sexual materials are distributed without the consent of the subject. What we did in our research was to identify which conditions might facilitate NDSM. Specifically, we focused on two moral disengagement strategies. The first one we tested in our first study was displacement or responsibility, which refers to harm and blame shifting from the perpetrator to others, as demonstrated, for example, by Milgram experiment. In our second study, along with displacement or responsibility, we considered a further moral disengagement strategy, namely dehumanization. Dehumanization represents the denial of humanity to the victim in order to disengage them from moral protection. Specifically, in our research, we consider Haslam bidimensional model for humanity, so human uniqueness and human nature. Human uniqueness represents all the characteristics humans does not share with other animals, such as self-control or moral reasoning, while human nature refers to what is believed to be fundamental to humans, and it is associated with emotionality, openness, and individuality. In our first study, 220 adult men read a fake newspaper article about a case of NDSM. In the sexting condition, it was described a situation of an ex-partner sharing with his friend sexual materials his girlfriend sent him in the past. In the no-sexting condition, shared sexual materials were not sent him by the ex-girlfriend. We then measured attribution responsibility to the man and to the woman and attitudes toward NDSM. What we found is that attribution of responsibility differed between conditions. Furthermore, our result displayed that attribution of responsibility to the ex-girlfriend for the sexting condition and to the ex-boyfriend for the no-sexting condition mediated the relation between experimental conditions, so sexting and no-sexting coded 1 and 0, and positive attitudes toward NDSM. In our second correlational study, these results were replicated, including dehumanization as a moderator in our tested model. Again, we measured sexting behaviors and attribution responsibility to the man and to the woman. Also, in this study, instead of attitudes toward NDSM, we measured actual man behaviors relating to NDSM. Participants of this study were 413 men that completed an online survey with measure of sexting behaviors, attribution responsibility, attribution of humanity, so human nature and human uniqueness to the victim, and NDSM behaviors. Our results display that sexting behaviors were associated with increased NDSM behaviors via the indirect effect of women responsibility. In addition, this mediation was moderated by human nature. What we found is that the model was significant for both levels of the variable, but for hikes in human nature, the effect was stronger. This research provides first evidence for the conditions that may favor NDSM attitudes and behaviors. First, we found that victim blaming in the form of displacement or responsibility toward women increased attitudes toward NDSM and actual behaviors of NDSM. Second, we found that the humanity dimension related to instrumentality, so denial of human nature, may strengthen this relationship. I shall conclude by thanking my colleagues for their work in this project and thank you for your attention.
Hello everyone, I'm Francesca Guizzo from the University of Surrey, and today I will present a research that I've been conducting in a collaboration with Daniela Di Michele and Mara Cadino from the University of Padova, testing whether there are potential detrimental effects of sexualization on female candidates' hireability and salary worth. So very briefly, sexualization occurs whenever there is a narrow focus on a person's sexual appeal and sexiness. So this is a broad concept that actually includes also the concept of sexual objectification. Sexualization is widely represented in both old and new media. And women tend to be the main targets of sexualization, which lead them to have to internalize a self-objectifying and self-sexualizing view on themselves. Very relevant to our research are also studies showing that when women are presented in a sexualized way, they are also perceived as having lower competence, agency, and morality, as well as lower success in the academic domain and also lower perceived electability in the political domain. So in our line of research, we tested whether sexualization may also impact women and female candidates, our ability and salary worth in working scenarios. Today, I will present the results of two studies that involve roughly 460 participants. And the procedure was the same across both studies. So participants have to read a job scenario and to evaluate a candidate for a medium status job position. So specifically, they have to read a curriculum vitae, and this curriculum vitae was matched with one of two potential pictures, depending on the condition. So in the non-sexualized condition, participants have to evaluate a candidate that was presented in non-revealing clothing, in professional clothing, whereas in the sexualized condition, the candidate, which was the same actually candidate as the non-sexualized condition, was presented in more revealing clothing. And these pictures were taken from materials that were pretested for sexualization and sexual objectification by Fasoli and colleagues. Then participants have to evaluate the candidate on a list of traits that measure the dimension of competence, morality, and sociability, and also agency with the scale by Gray and colleagues. Then they have to rate the likelihood that they would hire the candidate. They have to propose a salary for the candidate and also rate their likelihood of having, for the candidate to have a higher hierarchical position in the future, and also how likely is that the candidate would have a salary increase in the future. So these are the results that are stable and hold across both studies. So in both studies, we found that the sexualized candidate was perceived as lower in agency compared to the non-sexualized candidate. The sexualized candidate have a lower probability to be hired compared to the non-sexualized candidate. And also we tested mediation analysis to understand whether agency could be a significant mediator and mechanism underlining the hiring effect. And the results found and are significant, the indirect effects are significant for both study 1 and 2. So the sexualized candidate compared to the non-sexualized candidate was perceived as having lower agency, which then predicted her lower hiring, lower probability to be hired. And this was also true and significant also for salary. So lower agency predicted also lower salary for the sexualized candidate compared to the non-sexualized candidate, as well as lower future career probability and lower future salary rise. So overall, to summarize, what we found is preliminary data supporting the fact that subtle sexualization may impact actually the impression formation of female candidates, lowering their hiring, but also salary and career success expectancies via lower agency perception. Of course, this research is not devoid of limitation, which opens to future direction. One of the limitations is that we used materials, pictures that have that presented the candidate with her face blurred, which may have increased the humanization processes and objectification processes for both the sexualized and non-sexualized candidate. So in the future, we are planning to conduct research using materials that include the face, resembling also the real HR procedure. It would be also interesting to manipulate the level, the status of the job. So there are already preliminary data showing that competence, for example, may be modulated by job status. So we are planning to manipulate job status as well. And also we are planning also to include male candidates, so to have also male sexualization included as manipulation to test whether the effects may also be extended to male sexualization, or whether these effects are specific for women. So overall, these preliminary data extend and are in line with the previous literature on the sexualization effect on electability and academic success, but it also is related to another line of research that showed how self-sexualization may be used by women as a competition strategy in countries in which there is a high economic inequality. So specifically the higher is the perceived, the actual economic inequality. And our data in a specular way show that this strategy may actually backfire, and in a way it could be like one of the reason underlying the gender economic inequalities. So this is everything for today. Thank you very much for the attention. I'm looking forward to see you in Tenerife. And for those of you that could not participate, I'm very happy to receive feedbacks or questions also via email.
Our talk is titled When the Group Superiority in Empathy Perspective Taking is Acknowledged, Effects in Infrahumanisation Reduction. The central aim of this work was to test an experimental treatment for the reduction of outgroup infrahumanization. For this reason, we employed 3 target groups. In our first study, national groups. In our second study, professional groups. And finally, in the study 3, a rejected outgroup, undocumented immigrant. The experimental treatment consisted in making participants believe that the in-group is superior to the out-groups in showing empathy to others. Why should in-group superiority reduce infrahumanization? We believe that this process involves the paradox of being able to acknowledge the feelings experimented by the outgroups. The induction of empathic superiority was similar in the 3 studies. In the first, with a fictitious newspaper clip titled "Spaniards are considered the most empathic Europeans." In the study 2, with a 2 minutes video in which the mother of a child with autism talked about her experience with different professionals. At the end of the video, she said, "Of all health professionals with whom I had contact, psychologists were the professionals who better understood my situation." Finally, with 3 real news in which Madrid autonomous government took measures in order to facilitate the medical attention to undocumented immigrants. This idea appeared in the tragedy The Persian by Aeschylus after the defeat by the Greek in Salamina. This author said that the Greeks will know better than the Persians for winning the war, but for their ability to understand the pain that the Persians feel for being defeated. We followed a similar procedure as Legend et al. In the 3 studies. We applied emotional attribution questionnaires composed by 27 items. 12 of them were secondary emotions. The empathic superiority induction, in which our manipulation check was compassion referred to the in-group. And finally, the design was 2 by 2 by experimental manipulation, but by comparison group in the studies 1 and 2. The sample was composed by 196 undergraduates. Participants choose 8 to 10 traits referred to the in-group and the out-group. And our experimental design was 2 by 2 by 2 by 2. 2 within subject and 2 between subject. Outgroup of comparison and empathic superiority induction. We found an effect on our manipulation check, compassion referred to the in-group. Participants in induction of empathic superiority selected the trait in a greater extent than participants in the control condition. No effect of secondary emotion attribution was found, neither of comparison outgroup, while an interaction effect of experimental condition was found. Finally, no triple interaction effect emerged between secondary emotion balance, outgroup comparison, and experimental treatment. In the males, we observe that in control condition the classic effect of infrahumanisation, while in the superiority empathic induction, this effect disappeared. The sample of our second study was composed by 199 undergraduates. We employed the same factorial design, 2 by 2 by 2, with 2 within subject factor and 2 within subject factor. The same secondary emotion than in the previous study were employed, and also the secondary emotion, compassion, referred to the in-group psychologist, was employed as manipulation check. But in a difference of the previous study, participants indicate how much in-group and out-group members are likely to feel each of the secondary emotion presented. Scores vary from 0 to 100. As in the previous study, an effect on manipulation check was observed. Participants in empathic superiority condition rated their in-group psychologists as compassionate in a greater extent than in the control group. As in the previous study, no main effect of secondary emotion attribution was found, neither effect of comparison outgroup. However, an interaction effect emerged on the attribution of secondary emotion. Finally, no tribal interaction effect emerged between secondary emotion balance, outgroup comparison, and experimental condition. As appeared in the figure, in the control condition, the typical effect of infrahumanisation emerged, while in the superiority empathic condition, this effect disappeared. The sample of our study 3 was composed by 80 undergraduates with a 2 by 2 by 2 factorial design with 2 within subject factor, positive and negative feelings, and only 1 between subject factor, empathic superiority induction versus control. As outgroup was selected undocumented immigrant. This group was selected because the research indicated that in space is one of the most blatant dehumanized. It is necessary to point out that the Spanish government denied healthcare to this population group in 2012 due to the threat that it could involve to the national health system. However, Madrid autonomous government took measures in order to facilitate the medical attention to this group. Our dependent variables was measured in a Likert type format from 1 to 7, and as in the previous study, we found an effect of the experimental treatment. Participants in the empathic superiority in condition rated their in-group as compassionate than the control group. However, in a difference of the previous studies, a main effect of infrahumanisation was found. And, as in the previous study, an interaction effect emerged. However, the tribal interaction effect of experimental manipulation and the balance of positive and negative secondary emotion attributed to the groups was not found. As appeared in the figure, in the control condition, we found the classical effect of infrahumanisation. As in the previous studies, this effect disappeared in the superiority empathic induction. We have found a pattern or results that support the infrahumanisation hypothesis in the control condition of our 3 studies. For those situations in which there was infrahumanisation effects, We also found that the induction of empathic superiority was effective in reducing this effect. And this happened because it involved the paradox of being able to acknowledge the failings experimented by the outgroup, by the others.